Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Konstantin and today we will be working on portrait painting study while also talking and exploring life of Edgar Degas. He's one of my favorite painters and I think he's sort of like a bridge between classical and contemporary. I also really enjoy how he never sacrificed skill for creativity or creativity for skill. So we'll see how he was able to maintain that balance throughout his life. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So here, I'm gonna start with first placing a couple of the general shapes that I'm seeing. The general shape resembles to me a little bit of the triangle. So my first question is, where exactly do I want to place it? And it's not an easy question to answer. I take quite a bit of time and control and precision at that stage, because that early placement would be extremely important for the whole design of your painting. And even if it takes a couple of minutes, you really have to consider it. Again, a color study or using viewfinder um, would be really great for this earliest stages, just so you yourself have a pretty good idea where to go from here. So while I'm doing that and while I'm working a little more on the drawing, let's actually talk a little bit about Degas. So I think Edgar Degas definitely needs no introduction, but what I think is commonly sort of a little unknown is that we want to look at Degas beyond the usual impressionist label. Because often we think, or a lot of people think, of Degas as this sort of effortless, spontaneous sort of painter who just throwing paint on the canvas on the whim and just sort of like following the vibe or inspiration, when in reality, it actually was almost absolutely the opposite. He actually famously said, "No art was ever less spontaneous than mine. What I do is the result of reflection and the study from great masters." So that's the exact quote from him. And actually, it makes a lot of sense because when we look at his works and if we truly start to understand and appreciate it, we realize that it's not random at all. And then as we look at his works, then we realize, the overall context of the time, and we sort of understand how much mastery, how much foundation there is to be able to execute on a level that he was doing that. So it's far, far from being random or spontaneous. Um, and here, that also explains his fascination with let's say, Eng. He was famously obsessed with him. That also explains why he would spend hours and hours and hours. And for years, he was copying many works in Louvre, like Botticelli, especially, or Titian. Or even if you were to ever read his letters, you'd realize that there was no artist in history that he didn't study or wasn't trying to understand, wasn't trying to learn something from it. So you would really just see how fascinated he really was by all of those different painters throughout the history. And that just kind of explains that his art was able um to blossom so nicely, is because in its roots, like, it had such a nice, beautiful foundation and context. um I think in some way Edward Manet is also just in the same way, put in that same basket of being not really fully understood. I feel he's also a little bit of a victim of, just putting him out there as like, oh, like this sort of cute, free impressionist, where when in reality, I think there is more similarity between, painters like Edward Manet and Degas to someone like Velasquez or Franz Hals or Vermeer or Botticelli, um, in many ways. So just an interesting way to rethink who they are, and how they actually approached their works. Um, just an idea. Now here, on the painting, I'm actually also introducing some of the colors, and I'm trying to, first of all, without really making things too complex, I'm trying to just generally place large value and color shapes all at once. um, I don't really want to go too far with completion or detail or anything like that, because before any of that, I actually want to make sure that the general colors are working really, really well. Now, it may sound like it's something that you heard before, probably even before from some of the previous videos that I made. But the funny thing that, again, we don't understand painting with our mind. We understand painting through repetition and work. And it's almost like, imagine if you are an athlete and, like, let's say a soccer or football player, you show up on training and you're doing the same exercises every day. And that wouldn't be considered weird or strange, right? Because to get better, you just have to keep practicing. Whereas we think of painting as something sort of intellectual. And it sort of is in the way, but at the same time, there is a lot of muscle memory as well. There is a lot of repetition. And what I find we often sort of fight against a little bit is that idea that you could understand something in your mind. Like, for example, I've seen a lot of painters or people just, say that, like, oh, yeah, I get it. But then when they work, you see that they don't get it, right? And that's the difference, is that the only knowledge that counts is the one that you could show in your work ultimately, right? If it's the kind of knowledge that is in your mind but doesn't really show in your works, that's probably not a very good knowledge, or maybe just not being interpreted the right way. And that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind, is that we will be going here and in general through a lot of those different um, ideas that may sound little repetitive, but the reality of it, that you want that to be repeated. You want to sort of hear those same ideas again and again, just so that way it could be drilled into your head. So that way it almost like become a second nature. And each time you hear it and each time you apply it, you get a little bit better at it. So the ultimate sort of knowledge, internalized knowledge about art and painting, is not coming from any sort of revelation or any sort of like old master secret technique. Instead, you can learn the rules of the game fairly quickly, right? But then you have to practice, execute, and then repeatedly sort of try to understand those simple rules better and better. So it's not about hearing anything new, it's sort of like perfecting what you already probably heard and trying to get better at it and trying to look at all of those ideas from different angles. Well, now let us also go back to Degas. While many associate Degas strictly with Paris, in 1872 he took a long trip to New Orleans to visit his mother's family. He stayed with his brothers, who were running a cotton firm there. It was physically challenging trip for him. He wrote letters describing the sensory overload, mentioning the perfume of orange trees and overwhelming noise of the port. There is a great quote where he writes back to Paris saying, "Everything is beautiful, but one should not and cannot live here." He struggled with the heat and the intensity of the light, which he said hurt his eyes. But he still produced one of the most important and one of my favorite works of Degas, A Cotton Office in New Orleans. It's highly detailed, complex compositions showing his family members at work. Interestingly, that painting became the first of his works to be purchased by a museum. Um, if you guys never seen it, I would really recommend to check it out. I'll add, maybe like a tiny little version of that painting somewhere in the corner just so you could look and enjoy. But really amazing painting that I really like. Okay, let us go back to the portrait. So we were talking about that idea that the only knowledge that counts is the one that you could show, that shows in your work. And so I find it's really difficult to learn something that you think you already know. And I think more often than not, I kind of think that it's one of the biggest things that sort of prevents us from getting better is that idea when you sort of tell yourself, is that, oh yeah, I already know that stuff. Oh yeah, it's pretty obvious. I know it. And every time that happens, we sort of missing out on something that potentially we could have improved or got better with it. Because it's, we know something, but the question is how well we know it, how good we really understand it, and that's the point. So, for example, here I'm taking my time with sort of staying with simple big shapes, but I'm trying to refine and understand that simplicity better and better. And once those things are working really well, the painting, even without much more, should be still already pretty convincing. So I used to skip through early stage and kind of jump into completion pretty quickly. But the more I paint, the more I actually appreciate the early stage, and the more I sort of enjoy. And uh, the completion often doesn't even feel like any sort of separate stage. Instead, it actually feels like the organic continuation um, of painting. It's almost like I add something little here, something there. I make one edge little softer, the other edge little sharper, and the work sort of organically coming together as at once. And since we're also talking about Degas, I think he's such an incredible example of how painting and the artwork could be complete while some other parts of the painting are incomplete or completed less. And I think that is also beautiful. And I think it's the kind of tool that we also want to use in our own artistic projects because camera or I don't know, artificial intelligence or any of that stuff could sort of render and complete things for us and do all of those things. But what they cannot do and what camera cannot do is make choices. So those are great tools, but what makes it interesting is that pure vibration and of your own mind, your pure sort of, choice making, your decisions, your own aesthetic that you want to refine, that you want to get better at, that you want to sort of understand. And that's what matters. So that's what I really would want to work more on. Okay, so let us go back to the last little story from Degas, which is pretty interesting and actually applies quite well to what we're actually doing here. So, what I want to share is one of the memoirs that was written by Degas' friend. And he was describing how Degas was observing him paint. His friend was also a painter, so he was in his studio. And this friend, Genot was his name, he was trying to be very literal with his color. And so he was holding his palette knife up to the light right against the model, trying to match the exact skin tone on the model. The guy watched him and eventually burst out laughing. And he said, is it possible to compare a tone? If you had to paint the sun, would you compare your palette knife to it? And it's such a simple story, but there's so much that we could learn from that simple story. First of all, what we learn from it that we don't want to literally mix or we don't want to approach anything literally. We want to follow the nature, we want to get close to the nature, but not in the way that is literal, in the way that it's still art. And I think that's also a great reason why we want to learn how to understand nature by studying and looking at old masters, because that way we sort of learning where to look and how to translate what we're seeing into what sort of like becoming art. um, his idea that you cannot hold a palette knife against the skin, the idea is very simple, is because pretty quickly you're just gonna run out of colors and values. Instead, you want to mix harmony and the relationship, um, because otherwise you just won't be able, like if you are outside, you just won't be able to mix the color of the sun, or you wouldn't be able to mix darks dark enough, lights light enough. So somehow you'd have to compress it, and somehow you have to find some sort of relationship that make sense. Okay, back to the painting, and here you see me put in a couple of the more final strokes. Final for this demo, because I actually I'm gonna return to it and I'm gonna work more on it. But I just use this sort of videos that we're making here as some sort of way of communicating and sort of painting together. So the idea here is not fully complete the project, because it could be quite tricky and it could take some time. And sometimes it's also nice to put it aside and go back to it. And also, often I end up with a lot of studies that are finished or not finished. So it really depends. But I often still try to find some sort of conclusion, but it's tricky to do during this type of videos. Actually, this video was filmed during the live stream that we did on this channel. And for the current students that we have in online classes, if you guys don't want to miss this type of streams and future events and online classes and in-person classes that are coming up, check out the link to my website, and there you should be able to send me email by sort of leaving your email, and I'll add you to the list, the email list with all the updates. And thank you so much for joining today. Keep your eyes open for any updates in the future. Please subscribe to the channel and share, leave a comment, like. That really helps a lot to the channel, just so we could grow the subscriptions, and also just so we have a nice painting community. Well, anyway, thank you for joining, and I'll see you all again soon.